My wife cheated on me with my brother. 10 years later, I found out the kid is not mine. I'm Mike, and I thought I had the perfect life. I married my high school sweetheart, Chloe, right after college. We've been together for over a decade, and we have a beautiful 10-year-old son, Jake. Or so I thought. Chloe and I were that couple everyone envied. We were the prom king and queen, the perfect love story. Our families were close, and my younger brother, Dave, was like a best friend to both of us. He was always around, helping out with Jake, and we'd have family BBQs all the time. Life was good. Too good, in hindsight. But here's the kicker. There were always little things that didn't add up. Chloe would get weirdly defensive when I asked about her day. Dave and Chloe seemed a bit too friendly sometimes, but I brushed it off. I trusted them both with my life. Turns out, that was my biggest mistake. Chloe and I met in high school. She was the cheerleader with the infectious laugh, and I was the guy who couldn't believe his luck when she said yes to a date. We were inseparable from day one. We did everything together. Prom, graduation, college applications. We even chose the same university so we wouldn't have to be apart. Our friends joked that we were like an old married couple, even before we said our vows. After college, I landed a solid job in marketing, and Chloe found her calling se decidir as a nurse. We got married in a small ceremony, surrounded by family and friends. It was perfect, or so I thought. We bought a cozy house in the suburbs, and soon after, Jake came along. He was the spitting image of Chloe, with her big brown eyes and curly hair. Life felt complete. We were the kind of couple that did everything together. Every weekend, we'd host BBQs, game nights, and holiday parties. Our house was the hub of social activity. And my brother Dave, he was always there too. Dave and I were close growing up, only 2 years apart, so it was natural for him to be a big part of our lives. He was Jake's godfather, and the fun uncle who'd take Jake to baseball games and teach him how to fish. But looking back, there were signs. Tiny cracks in the facade. Chloe started working more late shifts, which I chalked up to the demands of her job. Nursing can be unpredictable, right? But there were nights when she'd come home smelling like a different cologne, and I'd laugh it off as the scent of a fellow nurse she worked closely with. God, how naive was I? Then there was Dave. He'd pop by unannounced, which wasn't unusual, but sometimes I'd find him and Chloe deep in conversation, stopping abruptly when I walked into the room. They'd exchange these quick, almost guilty looks that I chose to ignore. I mean, it's Dave, my brother. Why would I ever suspect him of anything shady? One time, I remember vividly, we had one of our infamous BBQs. It was a beautiful summer evening, kids running around, the smell of burgers on the grill, everyone laughing and having a great time. I was flipping burgers and chatting with a neighbor when I glanced over and saw Dave and Chloe huddled together at the edge of the yard. They looked ... intimate, not in a blatantly obvious way, but close enough to make me feel a weird pang of unease. When I asked Chloe about it later, she brushed it off, saying they were just talking about a surprise party for my upcoming birthday. I believed her. There were also the phone calls and text messages. Chloe's phone would buzz at odd hours, and she'd quickly silence it, claiming it was work-related. Sometimes, when I'd glance at her phone, I'd see Dave's name pop up, but I didn't think much of it. They were friends, after all, but those messages were often followed by Chloe disappearing into another room to take the call. Suspicious? Maybe. But again, I trusted them both implicitly. Then there were the nights when Chloe would come home late, way after her shift should have ended. I'd be sitting on the couch half watching TV, half worrying, and she'd waltz in with some flimsy excuse about an emergency at work or having to cover for a colleague. She always seemed so frazzled and defensive, and instead of pushing, I'd let it go. I didn't want to be the overbearing, paranoid husband. The worst part was the feeling of being gaslit. Whenever I'd bring up my concerns, Chloe would turn it around on me. "Why are you so suspicious, Mike? Don't you trust me?" she'd say with tears in her eyes, making me feel like the biggest jerk in the world. And Dave, he'd act all hurt, like I'd accused him of something terrible. It was a perfect storm of manipulation, and I was smack in the middle of it. Despite these oddities, I convinced myself that we were happy. We had our date nights, our family vacations, and our lazy Sundays in front of the TV. Jake was growing up in a loving home, or so I thought. My career was thriving, Chloe seemed to enjoy her work, and Dave was always around, filling our lives with his easygoing charm. But as I sit here writing this, I realize how blind I was. I ignored my gut feelings, trusted the wrong people, and now everything I thought I knew has been turned upside down. The perfect illusion has been shattered, and I'm left to pick up the pieces of my broken life. About a month ago, I was going through some old photo albums with Jake. We stumbled upon a picture from one of those BBQs when Jake was about 3 years old. It was one of those warm, nostalgic moments. We were laughing at how tiny he used to be, how his chubby cheeks would light up the whole room. There was this particular photo of Jake sitting on Dave's shoulders, both of them beaming at the camera. As I stared at the picture, something clicked in my brain. Jake didn't look like me, like at all. Sure, he had Chloe's eyes and hair, but there was something about his facial features that didn't quite match mine. But then I shook off the thought. I mean, genetics are weird, right? Sometimes kids just take after one parent more than the other. Still, that uneasy feeling lingered. That night, after Jake went to bed, I couldn't shake the thought. It gnawed at me, a tiny voice in the back of my head that wouldn't shut up. I found myself scrolling through more photos on my phone, comparing old pictures of myself with Jake's. The more I looked, the more convinced I became that something was off. I felt like a paranoid lunatic, but I couldn't let it go. So, I did what any paranoid, overthinking guy would do. I bought a DNA test kit. I figured, what the hell, right? It's probably nothing. Just to ease my mind. I ordered it online, and when it arrived, I felt this weird mix of dread and determination. I swabbed Jake's cheek while he was brushing his teeth one morning, telling him it was for a fun science experiment. He was thrilled at the idea, blissfully unaware of the bombshell it might reveal. The waiting period for the results felt like an eternity. Every day, I'd check my email multiple times, hoping for an update. Meanwhile, I tried to act normal around Chloe and Jake, but inside, I was a wreck. My mind kept running through scenarios, each one more disturbing than the last. What if Jake wasn't mine? What if Chloe had cheated on me? And the most terrifying thought, what if it was with Dave? When the results finally came back, I remember sitting at my desk, my hands shaking as I opened the email. The words blurred together for a moment, and then I saw it. Jake wasn't my son. The percentage was a cold, hard 0. I felt like my heart stopped. I read it again, hoping I'd made a mistake, but it was clear as day. My world shattered in that instant. I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Shock, anger, betrayal. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the screen. My mind raced with questions. How could this happen? Who could it be? And then the memory of Chloe and Dave's suspicious behavior flooded back. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the intimate conversations at our BBQs. It all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. I confronted Chloe that night. She was sitting on the couch watching some reality TV show, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I walked in, my face probably pale as a ghost, and just blurted it out. "I did a DNA test on Jake," I said, my voice trembling. "He's not mine." Her reaction was immediate. She went from confused to defensive in seconds. "What the hell, Mike? Why would you do that?" she snapped, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and anger. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how to play this. "Why?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Because something didn't add up, and now I know why. Who is it, Chloe? Who's Jake's father?" She broke down. Tears streamed down her face, and she tried to reach for me, but I pulled away. She admitted it then, in between sobs. She had an affair with Dave around the time Jake was conceived. She said it was a one-time thing, a mistake, a moment of weakness. She claimed she was drunk, that she didn't know how it happened, but the details didn't matter. The damage was done. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. I couldn't believe the betrayal from the two people I trusted most. The woman I loved and my own brother. The pain was unbearable. I felt like a fool for not seeing the signs earlier, for trusting them, for building my life on a lie. I left that night. I needed to clear my head, to get away from the suffocating sense of betrayal. I drove aimlessly, ending up at a 24-hour diner where I sat in a booth, nursing a cup of coffee I didn't even touch. My phone buzzed with calls and texts from Chloe, but I ignored them all. I needed to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. The discovery had ripped my life apart. Everything I thought I knew was a lie, and the people I loved most had betrayed me in the worst possible way. As I sat in that diner, staring blankly at the menu, I realized there was no going back. My perfect life was over, and I had to face the harsh reality of what came next. I was furious. After sitting in that diner for what felt like an eternity, I drove back home, but I couldn't bring myself to walk through the door. I parked a block away, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and anger. I needed to confront Dave. I needed answers. It was close to midnight, but I didn't care. I drove to Dave's place, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I got there, I didn't even bother knocking. I just barged in, the door slamming against the wall. Dave was lounging on the couch, drinking a beer and watching TV. He looked up, startled, as I stormed in. "Mike, what the hell?" he said, but I didn't give him a chance to say more. I grabbed him by the collar and yanked him to his feet. "You bastard!" I shouted, my voice echoing through his apartment. "How could you do this to me? To Jake?" Dave's eyes widened in fear, and for a moment I thought he might actually fight back. But then he slumped, his expression turning to one of defeat. "Mike, calm down," he said, his voice shaking. "Let's talk about this." "Talk," I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think we can just talk this out? You slept with my wife, Dave. You lied to me. Jake isn't even my son." He looked genuinely remorseful, but it only fueled my anger. "It was a mistake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were both drunk. It happened once, I swear. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." His words felt hollow, like a pathetic excuse for the betrayal I was dealing with. I released him with a shove and he stumbled back, nearly falling over the coffee table. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my rage. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Why keep it a secret for 10 years? Dave rubbed the back of his neck, looking anywhere but at me. "I was scared, Mike. I didn't want to lose you or Jake. I thought it would just go away." "Go away?" I repeated, incredulous. "You thought sleeping with my wife and fathering a child with her would just go away?" He had no response to that. He just stood there, looking like a kicked puppy. I felt a pang of something close to pity, but it was quickly swallowed by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. "I trusted you, Dave," I said, my voice breaking. "You were my brother, my best friend. How could you do this?" Dave finally looked at me, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mike. I really am. But I love Jake, too. I never wanted to hurt him or you." His apology felt too little, too late. I turned away, unable to look at him any longer. "I need to go," I said, my voice hollow. "I can't be here right now." I walked out of his apartment, slamming the door behind me. The cool night air hit me, and I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head. I felt lost, like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal and confusion. I got back in my car and drove aimlessly, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. When I finally made it back to the house, it was nearly dawn. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the front door. I could see a light on in the living room, and I knew Chloe was probably waiting for me. I didn't want to face her, but I knew I had to. I walked inside, and there she was, sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. She looked up as I entered, her face a mixture of hope and fear. "Mike, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Can we talk?" I stood there, feeling numb. "What's there to talk about?" I asked, my voice flat. "You cheated on me with my own brother. Jake isn't even my son. What else is there to say?" She stood up, crossing the room to stand in front of me. "I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. But I love you. I love our family. Please, don't let this tear us apart." Her words felt like knives, twisting in my heart. I wanted to believe her, to forgive her, but I couldn't. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too fresh. I took a step back, needing distance. "I need time, Chloe," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to think, to figure out what I'm going to do next." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, I promise." I didn't respond. I turned and walked upstairs to the guest room, closing the door behind me. I collapsed onto the bed, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and utterly heartbroken. The next few days were a blur. I took time off work, needing space to process everything. Chloe and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was strained and awkward. I spent a lot of time with Jake, trying to hold on to some semblance of normalcy for his sake. He was the innocent one in all this, and I didn't want him to suffer because of the mistakes of the adults around him. But every time I looked at him, I saw Dave. It was like a cruel joke, a constant reminder of the betrayal. I loved Jake, but I couldn't help the resentment that bubbled up inside me. It wasn't his fault, but it didn't change the fact that my life had been turned upside down. The confrontation with Dave had done nothing to ease my pain. If anything, it had made things worse. The brother I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. The wife I trusted had lied to me for a decade, and now I had to figure out how to move forward, for Jake's sake, if nothing else. The discovery had shattered my life, and I didn't know if I'd ever be able to pick up the pieces. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Days turned into weeks, and the initial shock started to wear off, replaced by a simmering anger that I couldn't shake. I was living in a house full of ghosts, ghosts of the life I thought I had, of the love I thought was real. Jake was the only thing keeping me grounded. His innocence was a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I had to be strong for him, even as everything else fell apart. Chloe and I tried to coexist for Jake's sake, but it was like walking on eggshells. Every interaction was tense, filled with unspoken accusations and regret. I started sleeping in the guest room permanently, avoiding Chloe as much as possible. She tried to reach out, to talk, but I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I ever would be. One evening, after Jake had gone to bed, Chloe cornered me in the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her eyes puffy from crying. "Mike, we need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, leaning against the counter. "What is there to say, Chloe? You cheated on me with my brother. Jake isn't my son. How do we come back from that?" She took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears. "I know I messed up. I know I broke your trust in the worst possible way, but I love you, Mike. I love our family. Please, let's go to counseling. Let's try to fix this." I felt a pang of something, pity maybe, but it was quickly swallowed by the anger that had become my constant companion. "Counseling won't change the fact that you lied to me for 10 years, that you let me believe Jake was mine when he wasn't. How am I supposed to trust you again?" Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll go to counseling by myself if you won't come with me. I want to make things right. For us. For Jake." I shook my head, the anger boiling over. "Right? You think anything about this can be made right? You destroyed our family, Chloe, you and Dave, and now I have to live with the consequences of your actions. I pushed past her, needing to get out of the house. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she called after me, her voice filled with desperation. "I need air," I snapped, slamming the door behind me. I drove aimlessly, the night blurring past in a haze of headlights and neon signs. I ended up at a bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where nobody knew your name and nobody asked questions. I sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey, trying to numb the pain that gnawed at my insides. After a few drinks, I found myself opening up to the bartender, a grizzled old man who'd probably heard every sob story in the book. He listened quietly as I poured out my heart, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. "That's a tough break, kid," he said, "but you gotta decide what you want. You want to keep living in the past, or you want to find a way to move forward?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Move forward. It seemed impossible, but what choice did I have? I couldn't keep living in this limbo, letting the betrayal consume me. I had to find a way to move past it, for Jake's sake, if nothing else. The next day, I decided to confront Dave one last time. I needed closure, a way to put this chapter behind me. I called him and told him to meet me at our old hangout spot by the lake. It was a place filled with childhood memories, a place where we used to fish and talk about our dreams. Dave showed up, looking as wrecked as I felt. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, the tension between us palpable. Finally, I spoke. "Why, Dave, why did you do it?" He sighed, looking out at the water. "I don't have a good answer for you, Mike. I was drunk, lonely, and stupid. I never meant for it to happen, and I hate myself for it every day." I stared at him, searching for any sign of the brother I once knew. "You betrayed me in the worst way possible. You ruined my life, Dave. How am I supposed to forgive that?" He turned to face me, tears in his eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mike. I just want you to know how sorry I am. I'll do whatever it takes to make it up to you, to make things right." I felt a surge of anger, but it was tempered by a deep, aching sadness. "You can't make it right, Dave. You can't undo what's been done, but I need to move forward, for Jake's sake, if nothing else." Dave nodded, wiping his eyes. "I understand, and I'll respect whatever you decide, but please, don't take Jake away from me. He's the only good thing that came out of this mess." I took a deep breath, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Jake needs stability. He needs to know he's loved. I don't know what that means for us, but I won't keep him from you. He deserves better than that. We stood there in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging between us. Finally, I turned and walked away, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was a step forward. Back at home, I sat down with Chloe. "We need to talk about what's next," I said, my voice tired but resolute. "For Jake's sake, we need to figure out how to move forward." She nodded, looking both hopeful and terrified. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mike. Counseling, therapy, anything. I just want to fix this." I didn't know if we could fix it, but I knew we had to try. For Jake, for the family we both loved, even if it was built on a lie. It wouldn't be easy, and it might not work, but we had to try. It was the only way to move forward. The days that followed were a blur of counseling sessions, difficult conversations, and trying to find a new normal. Chloe and I went to therapy together, and I also saw a therapist on my own. The betrayal had left a deep scar, and I knew it would take a long time to heal, if it ever did. But for Jake's sake, I had to try. Jake, bless his innocent heart, seemed to sense that something was off. He asked why I wasn't sleeping in the same room as Mom anymore, and it broke my heart to see the confusion in his eyes. We told him that Mom and Dad were working through some grown-up problems, but that we both loved him very much. It was the truth, but it felt like a hollow reassurance in the face of everything that had happened. Chloe threw herself into the counseling sessions with a determination that surprised me. She was genuinely remorseful and willing to do whatever it took to make amends. It didn't make the betrayal hurt any less, but it did give me a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. Dave was another matter. I kept my distance from him, needing time and space to process everything. He respected my boundaries, only reaching out occasionally to ask about Jake. I allowed supervised visits, not wanting to punish Jake for the sins of his parents. Despite everything, Jake loved Dave, and I couldn't take that away from him. One evening, a few months after the confrontation, Chloe and I sat down to talk about the future. We had made some progress in therapy, but the road ahead was still long and uncertain. "Do you think we can ever get back to what we had?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of hope and fear. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know, Chloe. What we had is gone, but maybe we can build something new, something stronger. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to take a lot of time and effort, but I'm willing to try if you are." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I am, Mike. I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the best I could give. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, but I was willing to try for Jake's sake and for the love we once shared. As the months passed, we continued with therapy and slowly began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't perfect, and there were days when the pain and anger threatened to overwhelm me. But there were also moments of hope, of genuine connection, that reminded me why I was fighting for this. Jake was a big part of that. His laughter, his innocence, his unconditional love, it all reminded me of what was at stake. He deserved a family, a home filled with love and stability, and I was determined to give him that, no matter how difficult it was. I eventually allowed Dave to see Jake more regularly. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Jake's happiness was more important than my anger. Dave was trying too. He was seeing a therapist and working to be a better person. It didn't erase what he had done, but it was a start. The hardest part was forgiving myself, for not seeing the signs, for trusting too blindly, for letting my family be torn apart. But my therapist helped me understand that it wasn't my fault. People make mistakes, sometimes terrible ones, and it wasn't my responsibility to bear the weight of their actions. 1 year after the discovery, we held a small family gathering. It wasn't the same as before, but it was a step forward. We laughed, we shared stories, and for a few hours it almost felt normal. I looked around at the faces of the people I loved, Chloe, Jake, even Dave, and I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was still long and filled with challenges, but I had learned something important. Family isn't just about blood or perfection. It's about love, forgiveness, and the willingness to fight for what matters. And no matter what, I was willing to fight for my family. Life doesn't always turn out the way we expect. Sometimes it's messy, painful, and filled with betrayal, but it's also filled with love, redemption, and the possibility of a new beginning. As I stood there watching Jake play with his cousins, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward, one step at a time.